Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Sivalingam, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about.
This week, I'm joined by Chichi Eruchalu, who is the Head of Leadership Development at Multiverse, and also Ali Jones, who's a leadership coach and learning experience designer. And as you will guess from the title, today we're talking about leading and learning in flat hierarchies or flatter organizations. I think the reason we kind of wanted to have this conversation is we only really look at it from one angle a lot of the time, and that is that because flat organizations are good for things like knowledge sharing, bottom-up learning, tapping into internal experts, we kind of just view them as a wholly good thing, but also they present new challenges to us in terms of how we lead, how we engage with each other, how do we work together. So that's really what we're hoping to get to today. And like I said, if you can drop any questions in the chat, that will also make for a great episode. But really, I want to kick off with something interesting that Chichi, you mentioned to me before. And that is that leaders are anyone that people want to follow in an organization. And it really speaks to this idea that leadership is a behaviour and not a title. So, yeah, I would just love to open-ended questions, sort of hear both your thoughts on that. Chichi, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you shared that, because often people think leadership is something that comes with a title, and management, and makes you a leader. But actually, there's a lot of people who are quietly leading, just because of the nature of which they carry themselves, the way that they inspire others, and the way that in which they know that leadership comes from caring. It comes from being able to be a visionary and carry people along. You could be a manager and people do what you say because you're their manager. And that role has the whole thing of like, well, this person's responsible for whether I might lose my job. But people follow you. If people following you because you inspire them, you care about them, you're developing them, that's where leadership lies. And there's a lot of individual contributors who are leaders. They may not manage people, but because they're managing projects which they need to do through people. And so they're leaders in the sense that they're able to really carry people along. They're able to support where the organization is going, and they recognize it's not about a title. It's about doing the right things when no one's watching, and recognizing that as a leader, people are always looking and seeing what you're doing, and they're asking themselves, right, is this somebody I want to follow and go along with?
And I think to build on that, when we think about kind of the role of a manager versus the role of a leader, and we think about, we get promoted, we might be fantastic at what we do, we're a great individual contributor, we become a manager in terms of kind of designated title, but what does that really mean? And our role is very much around, how can I inspire people, how can I motivate people, how can I take people on a journey? I'm thinking about the difference between this kind of like this carrot and stick. When I think about a manager, that's what I think of. You need to do this because this is what I say. I'm kind of being quite directive in my style of leadership, and there'll either be a reward or there'll be some kind of consequence. Whereas a true leader is someone, from my perspective, that can really light that fire in your belly. They know what's driving you. They know how to get the best from you. And that's all about relationships. It's about developing trust. It's about psychological safety. It's about coaching and stretching people to realize the potential that they didn't perhaps see that they had before. And for me, that's where the true difference lies. And particularly from a kind of a learning experience perspective, we talk a lot about leadership programs and management programs. So they're terms that I think we throw about all over the place, but the real difference to me is, are we kind of managing the work, or are we leading and inspiring our people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's that motivation, isn't it? It's that journey, like you said. Both of you alluded to it there. So the people who can tap into other people's motivation. You don't need a title to do that. And I guess it's what you said as well, Chichi, like the stuff we do every day cements whether we're a leader or not. And ultimately, it's a result of our actions. If we're doing the right things every day, people don't feel obliged to follow us. And if we're only there trying to dictate because of our title, then people aren't going to follow us. And I guess that feeds into the whole learning part of it as well, really. It's if we we don't get forced to listen to a podcast, we go and find a podcast that we like, or we watch a YouTuber that we find engaging. We don't like watch the one that everyone tells us we have to go and watch. So I suppose from that learning angle, do you see that as well?
I absolutely see that side of the coin. When I think about one of the biggest challenges we face in curating kind of engaging learning content is how well people actually choose to engage with it. If we take a leadership program, for example, is it being done to people? Are they expected to show up? Or is there actually something that they're getting from it themselves personally? And how's it going to help them in their career? And it goes back to that kind of simple WeFM. What's in it for me? We're decent human beings, but we're also quite selfish, and we like to know how things are going to impact us personally.
Yeah, and to add to that is also the timing of it as well, because as a leader, and if you're managing people, the timing of when you receive certain information and how you receive it is really important, because you might have a problem with an individual, you're trying to figure out how to have a difficult conversation, and going and sitting through a really long course is not what you need right now. You need to kind of get some advice around how to do that and how best do we deliver that. So when we're looking at training, even within Multiverse for our leaders, thinking about the modality of that is really, really key. And a classic example, I created an onboarding program, and in the first iteration it was like, okay, this is over a 3-month period, and there's kind of like these sessions, and we're kind of drip feed everything. But then when you're sitting down and talking after the end of it, it's sort of like, well, actually there's certain things people wanted to know right at the beginning, and it's like the timing of it is really, really important. And then it's recognizing that different people experience different things at different times. The way in which they learn is also different as well. And how are you recognizing that and making sure that the learning experience is inclusive for everybody as well?
Yeah, I think you both hit on a couple of things there, that it's about relationship builders will know all these things inherently, like knowing what's in it for me. I understand what you're looking to get out of it. I know the right timing because I understand what you're working on. Like I know setting expectations as well, like you said, around maybe that onboarding program. I think that leads us nicely into the next point, which is that if this is going to work like a flatter organization where leaders are not necessarily people with titles, we kind of need to build this culture of self-management and self-ownership. So, I guess that happens in a couple of ways. One, it's because if we want everyone to be a leader in a flat hierarchy, we also need to set the parameters up for people who aren't natural leaders to be able to do it as well, and give them the sort of guidelines to do it. But also, I guess, in terms of like how we work and how we set expectations for ourselves as well. So yeah, just curious, maybe Ali, you can kick us off, but what are your thoughts on that around self-management, self-ownership as part of this?
So self-management is probably, from my perspective, up there in the top 3 skills that great leaders need to be able to develop. And for me, self-management is about our levels of self-awareness. So how aware am I on the impact that my behaviours are going to have on those around me? And how often and how well do I build in self-reflection into my day? I don't think any of us sit there at work twiddling our thumbs. I've no doubt all of our calendars are kind of quite weighty. But how many of us, looking at your diary today, are you just back to back in different meetings and your context shifting? How often are we able to build in opportunities to self-reflect? So how did that conversation go? Or that one-to-one that I've got coming up in 10 minutes, what is the one thing that I want to get from that particular conversation? Or what's that piece of feedback that I need to give? How might that land with the other person? And then the final piece for me is around self-regulation. And, hands up, this is the bit that I personally find the hardest. But when I feel that I'm in a good place and my brain is kind of in that executive function piece, it's easy, right? I can choose the behavior that I want to adopt to best influence the overall outcome. When I'm stressed and I'm in that fight or flight, how well is my ability to self-regulate? So to give you totally non-work related example here, trying to get my kids out the door this morning, and my youngest is 1, I've got his welly boots on that are muddy, but it's hammering it down with rain. And I'm trying to get my eldest out the door, of which, after asking Oliver, please can you put your shoes on? Oliver, please can you put your shoes on? it became an Oliver, please can you put your shoes on now? So my self-regulation went down the pan. But in, joking aside, what does that mean for us as leaders in an organization? If we can't do those three things well, then actually how are we going to create the cultural norms that we're trying to create, particularly from a learning perspective?
Yeah, I love that, and very much resonate as a mother of two kids as well. The one phrase I always talk about with our leaders is that, to lead others, you need to lead yourself well. And, Ali, you touched on those things really, really succinctly. This ability to know yourself. We often talk about, what is your operating system? How well do you know yourself? How well do you know how you function? When you think about your work day, have you structured it in a way that's kind of supports you and the best way in which you work? When you think about how you show up for others, when you come to meetings, when you, all of those things, how well have you kind of really understood yourself? And that way you can also then articulate it to others, particularly if you're leading a team, around how best you work so that they can get the best out of you. And then, wherever you go, you always we call it the leadership shadow, you're casting a shadow. And is it a positive shadow or a negative shadow? As leaders, you forget how much of a role you play in the lives of the people who you work with. If you think about, and we've all had a manager who was absolutely horrible, and I'm sure you could still tell the stories today about what they did and what they didn't do. And equally, on the flip side of that, people who've really motivated and inspired you. So you're always thinking, how am I showing up when somebody leaves? Having interacted with me, have I been somebody who's really inspired and encouraged them, or have I really, really drained them? So being able to know yourself well is really important, because when you're then modeling those behaviors and setting the standard for what we expect culturally, it really does start with you. Your team is always looking, people around you, your peers are always looking. So those are the things that are really, really important to remind yourself. And if you make a mistake, and we all have moments when it's not a good day and we might say something that we didn't want to say, being quick to call that and apologize and quickly rebuild that relationship is so important, because again, that's true leadership. You're not shoving something under the carpet and ignoring it. And that's, really important.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you is what do you think, like a senior leader or someone with a leadership title, what is their role in helping others do this? I guess one thing would maybe be frameworks to go away and apply the things we're talking about here, right? Like, how do I share my insights with other people in a consistent way? How do I lead a project, perhaps? Is there some sort of checklist I've got for that? Or like, Ali, you mentioned those self-regulation and self-reflecting, are there tools we can give people that then mean they are going away and doing it in practice? Because I think that's the hard bit, is to do it day to day. Maybe when you don't know where you're starting, or you're not a natural leader, and we want everyone to have that fair chance to sort of become a natural leader. Is it sort of beyond frameworks, or is that a good place to start?
I think frameworks give us a common language, so they enable us to see things through the same lens. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with frameworks. I think they're helpful for that exact reason. I've got a book here. But if you've got to give someone, let's say, have a really difficult conversation, you can't really sit there and pull up your book and go, I'm just going to kind of lean back on that framework. You kind of have to be able to help people develop the confidence in themselves as a leader, and recognize that there isn't one perfect one-size-fits-all for being a great leader. It's about playing to your strengths. It's about being authentic. It's about communicating with honesty and having empathy for people. There are some fundamental kind of pillars. But ultimately, if I'm thinking about the role of the senior leaders and how do you create a culture where you're getting the best from others and letting them step into that leadership space, it's about how do you help them create opportunities to self-reflect. How do you create those opportunities for them to try things, for them to absolutely not go to plan, and for them to be able to talk through that in a really safe space? So 100% frameworks, from my perspective, give us a common language. They give us a starting point. But it needs to go further than that, because a framework doesn't necessarily give me the confidence or the motivation either to actually go and lean on that and the intuition piece.
I think it comes back to what Chichi said about the leadership shadow as well. Like, like you said, if I'm a first time manager and I'm doing a performance review and I completely lose track of my train of thoughts, I'm not turned into a textbook. What I'm doing is thinking like, how did a good manager from my work life history handle this situation? What would they have done, for example? And I guess thinking about that flatter hierarchy, if we're a product of the leaders around us and anyone can be a leader, we've got more people to learn from, but more maybe in a contextual sense as well. So, like the more our company is full of natural leaders, they're doing it in a way that's a good cultural fit. And therefore, maybe it's a good way. Maybe that's another sort of byproduct of a flat hierarchy, is we're able to cement more of like a cultural leadership style. I don't know if that plays into what you were saying, Chichi.
Yeah, I mean, because if I use Multiverse as an example, so our leadership framework, I'm going to just call it that, well, is the 3 R's in terms of like, you call it, is recruitment, retention, and results. So they're the three things. We wanted to keep it really simple, the 3 R's. So in terms of recruitment, we have we have a specific way in how we hire, which everybody kind of does the same thing, and it helps to have that common language and consistency of who we bring into the organization. And then from a retention piece, because we know how important that is, it's just 2 words: inspiration and developing. We inspire our people and develop them. Now, how that looks like for each person is very different. I'm a natural introvert. Someone who's an extrovert will inspire in different ways. So for me, for example, you have little things like, okay, when new people are joining the organization, I'd send them a little voice note, because it's an easy way for me as an introvert to connect with somebody and do something that way. And so when you're thinking about all the different people you can learn from, our 3 R's gives everybody common language. How people then articulate that is sort of down to them. But from a senior leadership perspective, the conversation we've always had is how do we model those behaviors first and foremost, what we want to see, because we know everybody's going to be kind of copying, so to speak. And particularly when you've got new leaders, they're always looking around, they're like sponges, and they're wanting to see, well, what does good look like? So you sort of have to set the expectation of what does good look like, because when things don't go well, or somebody does something wrong, the first question you ask yourself is like, did they know how to even do the thing in the first place? Did I set the right expectation? And often if we haven't done that, then we can go back to the drawing board with that. So you're sort of modeling that. And then in doing that, you're also then giving people space to kind of flex their own leadership style. So lots of people you can learn from. And in fact, I was talking to somebody just before this. I said, look, there's lots of people, think about who inspires you in this organization. What is it that you like about what they do? Take those things down and then think about how you can then apply that from your own stance. Okay. So we still all speak the same language, but we're all individuals. And I think that's really important as well. And then, coming back on Ali's point, being really clear and explicit that if you make mistakes, we've got your back, because we recognize that you're going to be trying different things. You might have to have a difficult conversation that doesn't go well. You might have to go back and clean it up. But knowing that gives people that confidence and that safety to try things and to test things and know that, okay, I'm not going to leave my job if I do this. And I think that's really important when you're leading.
Yeah, I think that taps into, I guess at the heart of this as well, is if we're operating with a flatter hierarchy, whether we're looking at it from the leadership or the learning perspective, people with leadership titles essentially have a different role now, right? Like that's part of it as well. It's no longer you need to lead every project, but maybe you need to just set expectations for every project so that other people can lead it, or you don't have to make every decision, but you have to, like you said, maybe give people the sort of safety net that if they do make the decision, all the consequences don't come back on them. So I guess it's, that is part of it. How far do we give people autonomy? Like we let you run with a project, but to what extent? So a lot of the time people do just need that clarity and expectation setting. And that, I suppose, is that part of this as well, this flat hierarchies idea?
Definitely, because, in most organizations, well, effectively in every organization, you hire great people, intelligent people who can go and do what you want them to do. So by setting that frame up front of like, here's where we want to get to. This is the ultimate goal. You go and do it in the way you feel is best. Actually really empowers somebody to go and do it in the way that they feel is best. Now, they may make mistakes along the way, but ultimately they've had that autonomy and they're empowered to go and do that. And when you are really clear on, here are the boundaries of how we do something. When we think about excellence, this is what excellence looks like in this organization, but we're not prescriptive around the how. And I think that's really important. And especially in fast-growing organizations, you cannot always be prescriptive around the how. You want to be really clear about where we want to get to, but then you allow individuals to kind of go and do what they need to do. And this is where, they can look to their peers and learn from each other. They can come together and share ideas and kind of come and have a plan. But as a leader, you're not there dictating, you must do it this way. And I think you get a lot more creativity and a lot more innovation that way.
I think you make a really good point there, Chichi, around boundaries, because I think unless we are clear around our expectations, there's a level of assumption. I think we've all been there where we've assumed somebody's understood what we've said, and we've also been on the flip side of that where we've totally got the wrong end of the stick. But what does that look like when, I guess, we're kind of delegating decision making, for example, is what does the scope of that actually look like? If this is where we're going, this is our end goal, do I have total freedom to get there in whichever way that I think is right for the business? Or are there some boundaries? So actually, Ali, I want you to go away and kind of come up with 3 different avenues that we could explore and recommend to me which of those 3 we think we should be choosing. But being clear about what that means at different times, because it's not, a one size fits all. It changes contextually. It changes based on what the risks are. It changes based on what the project is and who else is involved. But I don't believe, I say slightly with less conviction, that we can ever over communicate. I think maybe there are certain times where we possibly could, but I think the more transparent that we can be with people and the more we can bring them along in terms of kind of that collective boundary setting too, the more empowered we feel, and also the greater levels of confidence we feel in then making decisions, because we truly feel like we're both on the same page and that other person's got my back.
Yeah, 100%. Because we actually talked about this recently, and I was doing some training around decision making last week, and we talked about this very thing of decision boundaries. And when you think about some of the barriers why people don't make decisions or make them poorly, it's that thing of like they don't know what their scope is, what they're allowed to make decisions on. And so particularly in learning environments where you're wanting to really upskill people quite quickly and allow people then to go and apply what they know and take action, having clarity around that is so important. It helps with escalation. It makes sure that we're aligned on values at the beginning. It makes sure we're aligned on where we want to get to at the end. And then, the decision boundaries are not always necessarily like up and down. With your manager, it could be with your team or with your peers. Like, we're working on this project. My role is this, your role is this, your role is this. So you hold each other accountable for what you're all agreeing to do. And then things can actually move a lot faster.
And I think that becomes even more important when we're talking about organisations wanting to have a flat hierarchy, because we still need to make decisions as a business. And where do those decisions sit? And particularly as you kind of start to scale, and it's, what does that look like for me? Because the decisions that I might have been responsible for making today might look totally different this time next month or this time in 6 months. So continuing to communicate where roles and responsibilities or decision making is shifting to is important.
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, when you were both talking about that, I was thinking about an example from my own experience. I used to work in a company that was like half the marketing team in the UK, half in the US, and I had like almost a direct counterpart in the US, and there was always a like vagueness around who owned certain parts of the like the social media strategy. And it was always difficult because there was never one clear point of contact, or there was never a clear decision maker. And it actually just makes it a lot harder for people to work together, I think. So I couldn't agree more with that. And it actually comes back to something between us we all spoke about before, was high trust cultures. Like, if this is going to work, we need to have a level of trust, like whatever angle we're looking at, from whether it's the L&D one or the leadership one, there has to be trust there. If we're tapping into internal experts, I need to be able to trust that they've taken the time to think about the resource they're creating, that they've actually spent enough hours doing it on the job and it's not half baked. If we're, like you said, like a trust culture means that I'm trusting you to go away and come back with a few options. So I guess thinking about sort of tangible things people can apply, how can we kind of build that trust culture and sort of use it for this more effective flat hierarchy?
So ironically, when you asked the question about frameworks, there's one framework that I really, really, really like, and it's about earning trust. And the terminology is quite important there, because I think we quite often say things like building psychological safety, building trust. Do we build it? I guess that's slightly assumptive that we have total control over that, whereas the reality of earning somebody's trust is it's a process, and it's about demonstrating the right behaviours. But there's a really nice framework that I lean into quite a bit from a coaching perspective, which is that our levels of trustworthiness are equal to our credibility. So am I good at the things that I claim to be good at, plus my level of reliability? So how often do I deliver on my promises? And there's an interesting kind of nuance here about, do we overpromise and underdeliver? It's nice on occasion, but actually we're then setting unrealistic expectations about where we're delivering. So just deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Plus the level of intimacy, which I guess leans into this piece around psychological safety. How comfortable do I feel to be able to be vulnerable? Or does somebody feel to be vulnerable with me? All of which is divided by our self-orientation, which is a bit of a mouthful for saying I care about the impact something has on me rather than those around me. And I think it's a really interesting lens when we're reintroducing kind of that self-reflection piece as a leader, of which parts of that are important for me when other people are earning my trust, but what does that look like for them? Because for some people, having high levels of intimacy are much, much more important than having high credibility. For somebody else, that kind of persona might feel quite different. So one of those frameworks that I really like, I think it provides a lens to lean into about what does this mean for us as a culture and for the relationships that I have.
Yeah, it'd be cool to, if you can send a link after this, Ali, I can include some more information on that framework in the sort of post-event email that will go out. Just before we bring Chichi back in, we're actually just at the halfway point. So just to remind anyone, if they want to drop any questions in the chat, feel free. We can get to those shortly. I guess one thing as well is, it comes back to the thing you said right at the start, Chichi, around like leaders are people who want to follow. And they don't have to build trust because they already have it, because they've built a bank of evidence that they're good at the things they say they are, that they are well-valued members of the team. So I guess like a higher trust culture could actually start with tapping into the people that already have trust. Why do people trust them? Can they be advocates for the way we want to lead moving forward?
Yeah, and it always goes back to leading by example. And I like that framework, Ali, because it really does simplify like what trust is all about. So, you know, when I say I'm going to do something, do I do it? In a team, in an organization, that level of integrity, it seems so simple, but often can get just disregarded. And that's to erode trust. When you look at, building high trust teams, having this space to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, or I'm a bit unsure about this, or I don't necessarily feel this is the right direction. How often do we create those spaces that people feel that they can do that? Because without trust, the level of, being able to hold somebody to account, be able to challenge effectively, be able to actually work towards the goal that you want to have becomes quite difficult. And so I like the phrase of like earning trust. Because it needs to be earned. It needs to be proven that you are who you will say you are. It's one thing to say it, but actually, when the push comes to shove, is that really demonstrated there? And it's also been open and vulnerable, and saying when this is hard, or when this is a challenge, or this is not how it should be, and being okay to do that within teams. And so, modeling that, challenging that when you're not seeing that. And I guess every organization has their values, but if that's part of your value system in your organization, that we have trust, we do what we say we do, then it becomes easier to call it out when it's not there. If we have one of our values, we recently changed our values, but previously it was we are all owners, and we still kind of have that as a something that's deeply embedded within us. But we know that we are owners, we're accountable. So if we say we're going to do something, we do something. We see a problem, we're not going to be like, well, that's not my job. We take accountability for how can we, fix that, or find the right person to fix that. So it's a continuous conversation, and it does start with like, is it part of your value system in your organization? And then if so, then it's something that everybody can build upon, and then it's easier to challenge when it's not there.
That challenge point is really interesting, and I think the concept around leading by example, because as you were talking there, I was thinking around, we quite often say we want more diversity of thought and we want people to challenge our opinions and kind of reintroduce more and more feedback. And I always think of the example, if somebody's fresh out of university, this is their first job, how likely are they to go, and I'm picking on a CEO here, but how likely are they to go to a CEO and go, yeah, I really don't think that's kind of going to get us where we need to get to. Quite an extreme example, but if we're thinking that part of our cultural norms is that we want people to feel comfortable to challenge, to offer feedback, to offer their thoughts or their opinions that might be different to other people, is how do we create the space for us to do that? And that comes down to demonstrating those behaviours and inviting people to kind of demonstrate the behaviours that you want to. And how much more important is that when we have flatter hierarchies where we're suggesting that people are having high levels of autonomy and high levels of ownership? It's very well saying that people have that, but is the environment that they're in conducive to enable that to really thrive?
Yeah, and there's a company, it's called, the journal's called the Fresh Eyes Journal, and it's something that you can give to new employees, where it's basically encouraging them to do just that. And to sort of, you're coming in with fresh eyes, what are you seeing? And it gives them that sort of from the get-go that we really value sort of you sharing your perspective and kind of telling us what was great and where we can improve. And like I say, it just starts with that cultural piece of like, this is how we operate. And from day one, your opinion is valid and valuable here.
Yeah, I think with a lot of things we're saying here, it is that the chicken or the egg thing. Like, you don't really just write down on a bit of paper what your leadership styles are or your values or how you collect feedback from people. Like, it already exists, and then that informs what you do. And I really like that fresh eyes thing. You end up in the bubble so quickly, don't you, that you need to tap into that before it runs out. So just before we move on, we actually have a question from Holly. How would you recommend a leadership team support each other around leadership and keep each other accountable?
That's a really great question. I think the first place I would be starting is, what are the kind of the norms or the commitments that we're making as a leadership team for how we want to operate? And again, there's not a one size fits all here, but how much do we want to challenge each other? Well, what does challenge really mean? How can we understand what challenge means for each specific person? How do we want to make decisions? How do we want to manage, I don't know, for example, one-to-ones, so that we're somewhat consistent? But collectively getting on board where we're all signing up to those commitments and those behaviours. And then I think it is a case of holding each other to account for that. And sometimes that starts with one brave soul that goes, hey, Ali, I know we spoke about this. Actually, what I'm seeing is something different. And that can feel really uncomfortable. It can feel really scary if this is something that's new. But it quite often takes one or two people to start things. We start to see the value, the benefits things are having. And then all of a sudden there's something in it for everybody else. They've got that motivation to also to hold people to account for it. And having some clear direction. What are we hoping to achieve as a leadership team? What's our purpose? What are our core values? And using that as our North Star.
And then to add to that as well, it is about building a culture of high trust as a team, because in order to challenge in order to hold each other accountable, you need to trust each other and trust that you all have the same you all want the same thing, you're all moving in the same direction, and it's having this kind of first team mindset. So often when you've got leadership teams, you all have your own individual functions. You're very much like, it's about my function, what we're going to do, so that's really important. But actually your loyalty is actually to the first team, which is your peers and that leadership team. So how are you all working together? How are you all being aligned? getting to know each other and what's your motivations, why are you here, what matters, and all aligning yourself to the same goal. That those things, to what Ali said, is really going to help your leadership, Holly, to just really thrive. And then you're kind of committing to holding each other accountable once you've agreed all those things.
Yeah. One thing I've seen in a lot of companies that work well is where the leadership team all treat their team as that, like a separate thing within the business. Like we need to do, like, although we can have consistency around how we work as a leadership team, at the end of the day, I need to go to my team, do what makes a good, what's a good fit for our team, who we are as individuals. Can I then share that with the other leadership team? But also, I guess that leads us nicely onto like a follow-up question around, we don't need to roll out flat hierarchies en masse. We can try things on a smaller scale. Like maybe if today people want to implement some of what we're saying, they could go away and try it on a smaller scale, right? We could say on this one project, we're all just going to be flat, like one person can take the reins. Do you have any advice for people doing that and just who want to try it on a small scale to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when you are starting something like this, really clear from the outset what you're looking to achieve, what will success look like on this project or initiative. Getting clear on what everybody's roles are. So even if you are having this flat hierarchy of like, there's no lead, I mean, there will always be a leader because you're going to need someone just to lead. But in terms of we all have a commitment to how we're going to show up, what we're going to do, how we communicate, all that sort of thing. So really spending the time at the beginning to get clear on all of those things and everybody contributing to creating that and that contracting with each other as a team. And then all of you then committing to actually doing that. So where this works well is where you do spend that time to really get clear on that and making sure that everybody's really aligned to the direction of travel and also what the expectations are and what they're responsible for as well. And then check it in. So when you're having your meetings and things, if things are going a bit off or somebody hasn't done what they're going to say they're going to do, if you agree at the beginning and say like, well, what are we going to do when the next person doesn't do something? Well, as a team, this is what we're going to do. Then everybody knows that. And then it's a lot easier to hold those people to account when that happens.
And I think my only other advice here would be to try it. Nothing has to be permanent. Give it a go. Find a project or a team that wants to lean into this. And then off the back of that, learn what was it that went particularly well for us? What is it that we tried and actually just didn't feel right for us? What was it about that didn't feel right? And it might be that you end up taking some of the learnings and reintroducing those into other teams, but not others. And that's okay. I don't think we need to be prescriptive about this is what you have to do. Give things a go, fail fast, learn from the things that didn't work and repeat the things that do.
Yeah, exactly. If it works on a small scale, roll it out on a larger scale. If it doesn't, why did it fail and how can we improve it for next time? And I think that is the mindset to have, to start small. Nelson always says sort of like start small, but think big. So like, where do you want to get to eventually? But how can you do it on a small scale so that if people do have a bad experience, it's not like the company kind of, complete meltdown because we did it at every single level of the business. So, I got a question as well from Michelle. It's around this sort of behavior of calling each other out and like challenging each other as leaders. And in your experience, does that kind of create more trust or less trust across organizations? Hopefully I'm doing that question justice, Michelle.
I think from my perspective, and it's a bit of a washy first answer, but it depends. It depends on where your team are at the moment, how much trust is there. Are you in a place where you can call out and go, give Ali a nudge, Ali, come on, mate, stop doing that? Or actually, do you need to be able to pull somebody to one side in a much more safe environment and ask some questions about, what was going on there? I noticed that you were really distracted I noticed you're on your phone a lot. What was going on? So the answer from me is it depends. And it feels uncomfortable if it's new. And none of us like being called out, but we also quite often are aware of the behaviours that we probably shouldn't have demonstrated. So I think it also shows a level of commitment and respect to the wider team that actually these are the things that we said were important to us. And I'm kind of holding us as a whole team to account in terms of how you actually approach that conversation. That will look very different based on the relationship, what the behaviour was, and what the kind of perceived consequences of approaching it in different angles might be.
Yeah, I'd agree. Call it out doesn't mean big 10-hour announcement, mass email to the whole organization, this person did X. Call it out can just literally be taking somebody aside after the meeting and said, I noticed X, Y, Z. And if I use ourselves as an example, we're really building this culture where it's safe to do that, because we've all committed to doing excellent work. We all care about the relationships that we have in this organization, and we recognize that it's okay to have those conversations. It's okay to give feedback, because as part of giving feedback, you're helping somebody get better. But in order to give feedback to somebody and they receive it well, you need to have that upfront relationship at the beginning, and that commitment and that contracting of like, my role in this, say it's a manager to report, it's sort of like, my role as your manager is to support you, to develop you. I'm here to, I care about you. And as part of caring for you is that there will be times when I'll need to give you difficult feedback or challenging feedback. Are you open to that as a way of working with each other? And so setting that up at the beginning helps to make those call it out conversations easier, because the expectation is there, like, oh, they will call me up on it. And then finally, to Ali's point, and I've seen this firsthand in many organizations when it's done well and not done well, where people are kind of not being called out for behaviors that go against the organization's culture and values. It's so detrimental to the rest of the organization, because what you're basically saying is that we don't care. And especially when it's people who are performing really well, they're performing well, but their behaviors are bad, or not what we'd expect. And it's sort of sending a message that that's more important than actually behavior and culture. So when we do that, and we've done that multiple times in Multiverse, it sends the message that we value our values, we value our people, and we won't tolerate things that are going to disrupt and kind of destroy this incredible thing that we're building. So I think it's really important if you're leaders and a leadership team, to think about what message are we sending when we don't take action on certain things, and what message are we sending when we do.
Yeah, and I think as well, it comes back to what you said earlier about timing. Like, if this is the first time we're doing it and we don't do it right the first time, the likelihood of it happening again or succeeding the next time is bad, right? So if we don't approach the conversation in the right way, the next time we do it, there's already like negative lingering sentiment around that. One thing we've spoken about a few times, more from like a learning perspective, is a lot of companies already have a learning brand, or how learning is perceived in their business. They often just don't know it. And I guess, is there a similar thing here with leadership? Like, most companies already have like a leadership culture or leadership style. They're just not aware of it. And they need to kind of go on this like tour around the organization, listening to people, finding out what good leadership means to them. Because often we see it, people are so eager to act, they roll out a strategy and actually have not really understood what's going on internally, are they? So, do you think that maybe is a good start if people are sort of thinking, what can they start doing today? It would maybe be that listening tour of the organization, perhaps.
Listening, talking to people, seeing what's working, seeing what's not working. It's especially important when you come into an organization, because there's a tendency to kind of put your mark down and show that, I'm adding value and all that sort of thing. But even in just, in existing roles, constantly evaluating, taking a temperature check, what's happening, like, how are people feeling? What are we seeing? Is there a consistency across the organization around the experience, the leadership experience? And this is why this whole sort of first team concept is really important, because yes, you are looking after your own department, but when you agree at the top level how we want to do that and how we want to treat everybody and how we want the experience to be, then you're going to get a level of consistency across the business. And it means you're not going to have these pockets of differences, and you can have that same thing everywhere.
And I think you're right, Gary, that every single organization has a leadership culture. Whether it's the culture you want is an entirely different question. But if any of us that are in leadership roles have this leadership brand, there'll be this shadow that Chichi talked about that kind of other people see, even if we don't have the self-awareness to see it ourselves. And I think there's an element here around intention versus impact. And I know that I kind of spoke about this before, but I like to think that almost all of us have really positive intentions. Is that always the impact that we're having? Not always. So if we're trying to get our ear closer to the ground and we're trying to understand what's really going on, is when we're listening, and are we really listening? Are we hearing the things that we want to hear, or are we really truly engaged with what we're hearing? Is what do we do with that information? Because people have been really vulnerable with us to be honest, to tell us the things that they love, to tell us the things that they would like different. What are we doing with that? And even if our intention is perhaps as a senior leadership team, we want to go away and we want to reflect on this in our next team off site that's in 8 weeks' time, our intentions are really positive there. The impact perhaps is, I've just been really vulnerable with you, and now you're doing nothing with it because I haven't heard anything for 6 weeks. So actually thinking around what are some of the behaviours that we also need to make sure we're following through with, so that where we are trying to do the right thing, the impact that we're having is very much aligned with that.
Awesome. Annie has read my mind in the chat. We've got a good question about what flatter hierarchies mean for career development and progression. It comes back to something you said at the start. Often we see this thing where people who are good at their job get promoted to leadership roles and then don't necessarily have the skills. But I wonder if you agree, the flatter hierarchy and the thing where leadership is behavior could actually be a great way to put an end to this, because people will build up a bank of evidence that they're a good leader before, if they want to progress into a higher role, they can. And also people who don't necessarily want to follow a career path where I do my job well and now I manage people and I do less of what I enjoy. If leadership is a behavior and you don't need the title to do that, you also don't have to go down that route. So I'm just curious if either of you have any sort of strong opinions on what progression means in a flat hierarchy.
Yeah, and I like Annie that you said the word progression as opposed to promotion, because you can constantly be progressing every day as you're learning new skills, having new opportunities to experience different things and work on different projects and that sort of thing. So it often comes down to, with each individual, what is it that they want to do? What is it they're ultimately chasing? And it's funny, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, and we were saying, often people chase a title, but actually, rather than be chasing a title, it's chasing, what is it that you want to learn and know how to do? What is it you want to add into your toolkit? And so within a flatter hierarchy where there's probably less opportunity for promotion, there's a huge opportunity to gain a whole wealth of knowledge and get that depth in your kind of in your toolkit, for use that word again. So different projects, you can work with different teams, you can get to see a much more broader understanding of the organization. Back when Multiverse was much smaller, I joined there when we were like 50 people. So I wore many hats. I got to do lots of things and I learned a lot of things. And then as an organization gets bigger and bigger, then the role become more specialized. And you do become more hierarchical. So I think at that stage of a business, or when your business is a lot flatter, it's such an amazing opportunity to learn, because there's lots of people you can learn from and lots of different teams you can learn from, and actually throw your hat in the ring to say, I want to be involved in X, because there's no structure around you're not in this team, or you need to be at this level to do that. So yeah, that's what I say.
And I think there's a piece here around how we communicate. So how are we, part of our recruitment process and as part of our onboarding, how are we setting those expectations? Because if people come in with the assumption that a flatter hierarchy means I have more autonomy, I've got more creativity, I can innovate more, I can make decisions, but they also think that there are still lots of opportunities for promotion, you're going to be in a situation where actually people are quite unhappy and people are going to leave. But whereas if you communicated that and been really transparent about, this is what this looks like for us as a business, this is what you can expect in terms of your progression, in terms of your continued learning and growth. This is what it looks like for us. This is what it might look like for you over the next 12 to 18 months. But if people aren't clear on what that looks like, and this isn't just with flatter hierarchies, it's with lots of things, you run the risk of that misalignment where we're not happy because they're not happy because it's not the right environment for them to thrive. So kind of candor and transparency here for me is key.
I think, Ali, as well, it goes back to something you explained to me before, was about tapping into people's motivations. So like Chichi said, it not necessarily promotion, because a promotion normally is just new title, new salary, but maybe it doesn't actually tap into why you want to do your job or why you want to get better at it. But if we think about it from this progression mindset, it's like you get to do more of the things you enjoy, you do them better, and therefore there might be some sort of reward there. And it's about this intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, isn't it?
It really is. And to give you an example here, my husband's an engineer. He's done the same job with the same company for 12 years. And I was like, what? Do you not get bored? And he's like, no, I'm really, really damn good at what I do. And he loves that. He wants to be seen as the expert. He wants to kind of, I guess I'm kind of leaning into Dan Pink stuff here, but the mastery piece is incredibly important for him. For other people's, it might be around autonomy, or it might be around having a clear sense of purpose and that feeling aligned to the business. But that looks so different to each and every one of us. I'm incredibly high on autonomy, probably one of the reasons I enjoy working for myself. For my husband, that would be his worst nightmare because he also really likes certainty. So it's just about understanding the people in your teams. We're kind of going full circle back into the piece around relationships and getting to know people and letting them play to their strengths. And I think in a flatter hierarchy, there's much more opportunities for that to really flourish.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I'm just conscious of time. We're coming to the final 5 minutes, but also, Chichi, wanted to ask you something very quickly. You mentioned to me before that during periods of growth, you might actually need to reintroduce hierarchy. So it can be this fluid thing, right? Say we increase the headcount by 50% and now suddenly we're a massive team. We may actually need to introduce that middle person back in to like oversee a team if it's a brand new team. So just curious to quickly get your thoughts. And then we've got a good question in the chat as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, we have experienced that, you know, when you're growing rapidly, and also span of control, because it gets to a point where you start to become ineffective as a leader because you're managing too many people. So bringing in, another layer, it's a great development opportunity for somebody to kind of step up and have that position. But it also means that you're then freed up to focus on other things. So if your organization is growing very fast, so if I think back to 2020 when we was even locked down, and one of the teams I had was 4 at the beginning of the year, and it went to 60 by the end of the year. In order to be able to keep growing that fast, you've got to put levels in, and then you start developing that layer of leadership so that they can then look after the people underneath, and then that's perfectly fine. And then it's okay then to take a step back as you get even bigger and think, okay, does that still work? Because as you're adding more and more layers, and I remember when I was director of delivery, I was like, I need to get information, and I'm going to this person who's going to this person who's going to this person, when actually it'd be great if I just go to this person. So then you reflect and go, actually, is this levels that we have now still the right thing? Or is it now better to kind of go back to a flatter hierarchy and give people more autonomy, more accountability and bigger responsibility? And that's sort of what we've gone back to now. And that's actually been working really well. So it's never set, you got to just keep looking and seeing what's working. And if you're finding that, it's becoming a bit cumbersome with the levels and the layers and more titles and more pay and all that sort of thing, then it might be a good time to evaluate and say, do we need to just rethink how we're structuring things in this team?
Yeah. And it comes back to what we said a lot of the time today. Like, stuff doesn't need to be particularly one thing. It can be different things at different times. It's not saying you say we're a flat hierarchy and now you do it forever. Just one last question from the chat, a really good one from Sam. Do you think that pay bands work in flat organizations? Because pay is usually attached to a specific level from like a hierarchical idea. And it does kind of drive this obsession with promotion rather than progression, as Sam's saying. So no, we've just got a couple minutes left, but just to hear both your thoughts on that would be interesting.
I mean, from a kind of a broad perspective, for me, salary banding comes down to roles and responsibilities. So what is it that I'm expected to deliver within this particular role? What am I accountable for? What decisions am I making? And that's benchmarked against kind of what's going on in the market. But that's quite a simplistic answer. I'm sure Chichi can provide a more specific one for Multiverse.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you start to get... if I put the other side in terms of levels and things, when you have a lot of people and you have different levels, I think pay bands are essential for fairness. When you're a lot flatter, I think it's where you want to focus your attention, because like we've talked about people's motivation, it's not always about pay. It's not always about what, so sometimes it's a title, it's sometimes what you're doing, the level of responsibility. So I guess to answer the question, do I think that they work? It depends on the organization and for the purpose of what you're trying. Why do you want to have pay bands? Is it because pay bands are useful when you're hiring lots of people and when you have lots of people doing the same role? If you've got one person here, two people here, I don't think it's necessary just yet. I think it's important to be fair and to benchmark salaries and make sure that they're fair. But it sometimes then makes it hard. You're focusing on the wrong thing. That's my personal view. So yeah.
No, yeah, great point about that company size thing. I think it's see what fits for you or your team, or maybe within a company it works for one team, it doesn't work for another team, and I guess there's different ways. But we're coming right to the end now, so I guess I just need to shamelessly plug the next episode. So you would have seen a link in the chat. Next time we're joined by Harriet and Dara from And Digital, who won an award for their onboarding program, and they're going to be sharing some of the advice on how they did it, how you can apply the same principles to your onboarding, and that's in 2 weeks today. And you can, if you're listening to this as a recording, you can go to lu.ma/how now, and you'll see all the upcoming episodes, or the link will be in the show notes. And then just one last final point, Chichi and Ali, I would recommend following you both on LinkedIn, but is that the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah,
certainly is.
Cool. Well, that brings us almost exactly to time. So yeah, just want to say thanks again to Chichi and Ali for joining us.